The Colonial Parkway Murders, a serial killer on the loose. The Colonial Parkway Murders is one of the most chilling unsolved serial murder cases in U.S. history, involving the brutal deaths of at least 8 people between 1986 and 1989 along the scenic Colonial Parkway in Virginia. The killer, or killers, targeted couples, often while they were parked in remote areas along the parkway, a 23-mile stretch connecting historic sites like Jamestown, Williamsburg, and Yorktown. Despite years of investigation, the case remains unsolved, and the murderer is still at large. The string of murders began in October 1986, when Kathleen Thomas and Rebecca Dowski, both students at the College of William and Mary, were found dead in Thomas's car, which had been pushed off an embankment along the Colonial Parkway. The women had been strangled, and their throats were slashed, but there was no sign of robbery or sexual assault. The brutality of the crime shocked the small, peaceful community, but no leads emerged. A year later, in September 1987, another couple, David Knobling and Robin Edwards, were found murdered near the Ragged Island Wildlife Refuge, just off the James River. The two had been shot, and their bodies were discovered washed ashore days after their abandoned vehicle was found with its windows rolled down and the radio playing. Again, the motive was unclear, and the connection between the two couples' murders became a focus of police attention. In April 1988, another couple, Cassandra Haley and Richard Call, both students at Christopher Newport University, disappeared after going on a date. Their car was found along the Colonial Parkway with the keys still inside, but their bodies were never recovered. Despite extensive searches, Haley and Call were declared presumed dead, and their case was considered part of the series of Colonial Parkway murders. The final known victims were Daniel Lauer and Anna Maria Phelps, who disappeared in September 1989 while traveling along Interstate 64, close to the Colonial Parkway. Their bodies were found in a wooded area near a rest stop several weeks after their disappearance. Like the previous victims, they had been brutally murdered, though their exact cause of death was never publicly released. The investigation from the outset, law enforcement struggled to find a clear pattern or motive behind the Colonial Parkway murders. All of the victims were young couples, but none of the cases involved clear signs of robbery or sexual assault. The killer seemed to strike randomly, with long gaps between the murders, making it difficult to establish a predictable pattern. Forensic evidence was limited, and many of the crime scenes were located in remote, wooded areas, complicating the collection of clues. The FBI became involved in the case, but despite the federal resources at their disposal, they were unable to generate any significant leads. Over time, several theories emerged about who might be responsible for the killings. Rogue law enforcement officer. One theory suggested that the killer could have been posing as a police officer or was a rogue law enforcement officer, given that some of the victims' vehicles appeared to have been stopped in a manner consistent with a routine traffic stop. A serial killer with a military background. Given the precision of the killings and the lack of clear motives, some investigators speculated that the killer might have had military training or experience, allowing them to evade capture for so long. Multiple killers. Another theory suggested that the Colonial Parkway murders were not the work of a single individual but multiple killers operating independently. This theory arose because of the variation in the methods used to kill the victims. Cold case and new leads. In the years following the last known Colonial Parkway murders in 1989, the case went cold. Families of the victims continued to press for answers, but with no new evidence or suspects, the investigation stalled. Over time, the case became one of the most infamous unsolved serial murder cases in Virginia's history, capturing the public's imagination and generating numerous true crime documentaries and podcasts. In recent years, advancements in DNA technology have renewed hope that the case may eventually be solved. In 2010, it was revealed that evidence from the crime scenes had been preserved, allowing investigators to re-examine the case using modern forensic techniques. However, no definitive breakthroughs have been made public. One of the most promising developments came in 2018, when the family of one of the victims, Kathleen Thomas, learned that the FBI had used familial DNA searching to identify potential suspects in cold cases. While this technique has solved cases like the Golden State Killer, it has not yet yielded results in the Colonial Parkway murders. Suspects and theories over the years. Several individuals have been considered suspects in the Colonial Parkway murders, but none have been conclusively linked to the crimes. Stephen E. Vogel, a Virginia resident with a history of violent crime, was briefly considered a suspect in the 1990s. However, investigators were unable to find enough evidence to tie him to the killings. Another suspect, Dennis Rader, known as the BTK Killer, was also investigated, as his killings involved stalking and preying on unsuspecting victims. However, Rader's crimes were mostly committed in Kansas, and no solid link was found between him and the Colonial Parkway murders. In addition to these suspects, various theories have emerged about whether the murders were the work of a drifter, a truck driver, or someone with ties to the local area. However, none of these theories have resulted in an arrest or a definitive answer as to who was responsible. The ongoing search for justice. The families of the victims continue to seek answers and closure. For years, they have held memorials and vigils in honor of their loved ones, keeping the case in the public eye. Some have worked with private investigators in hopes of uncovering new leads, while others have expressed frustration with law enforcement's handling of the case. The Colonial Parkway murders remain one of the most notorious unsolved cases in American history. The scenic Parkway, once a peaceful route connecting some of Virginia's most historic sites, is now synonymous with violence and mystery. Despite decades of investigation, the killer, or killers, have never been caught, and the case continues to haunt the communities surrounding the Colonial Parkway. The killer still at large despite years of investigation. No arrests have been made in connection to the Colonial Parkway murders, and the killer remains at large. The case has remained unsolved for over 3 decades, leaving behind a legacy of fear and unanswered questions. Families of the victims continue to hold out hope that advances in forensic technology or new evidence will finally provide the closure they seek. The Colonial Parkway, with its quiet and scenic views, remains a chilling reminder that a killer is still out there, evading justice for more than 30 years.